The air inside the courtroom was thick with tension. All eyes were fixed on the young boy standing at the center of it all. His small frame trembled, but his voice rang clear, cutting through the silence like a blade. The moment Malik pointed directly at the judge, the room fell into a stunned hush. A child, barely 9 years old, had just done the unthinkable, challenged the very symbol of justice itself. For a moment, it was as if time stood still. The judge, a man whose authority had never been questioned, sat frozen in his seat, his usually composed expression flickering with something no one had ever seen before: uncertainty. But Malik was not finished. His breath was steady, his resolve unshaken. He took a step forward, his wide, determined eyes locked onto the man in the judge's seat. "He's not who he says he is." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. The judge's fingers tightened around the gavel, but the slight tremor in his hand betrayed him. For years, Judge Thompson had been a towering figure in the legal system, respected, revered, feared. But now, under the piercing gaze of a child, the unshakable foundation of his authority was crumbling. Sweat gathered at his brow. He shifted in his seat, but no movement could mask the unease creeping across his face. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder, filled with confusion, disbelief, and curiosity. Who was this boy? And what did he know that no one else did? Malik's voice didn't waver. "I know you," he declared, his words striking like thunder. "And I know you're not who you pretend to be." Gasps erupted once more. The judge's face paled, but he quickly tried to regain control. He pounded the gavel against the desk, his voice firm but edged with something unfamiliar: fear. "That's enough, young man," he warned, though the authority in his voice was slipping. But Malik refused to be silenced. His small hands clenched into fists. He had spent his life watching the system fail people like him, watching justice slip through the cracks for those who needed it most. He had seen his family fight, struggle, and suffer at the hands of those in power. And now, as he stood in the middle of this grand courtroom, he knew one thing: this was his moment. For weeks, he had sensed something was wrong. He had seen the way Judge Thompson's eyes darted toward the businessman's lawyers, the way his posture stiffened whenever certain evidence was presented. Malik had spent his entire childhood learning to read people, to recognize the subtle signs of deception. And now, standing before a man who was supposed to be a pillar of truth, he saw it clearly: fear, guilt, and the weight of a secret too big to hide. The courtroom was no longer focused on the case at hand. Every person in that room was now fixated on Malik and the man sitting on the bench. The walls of the courtroom, which had long upheld the illusion of justice, seemed to close in around Judge Thompson. Malik took another step forward. "This trial isn't fair," he said, his voice filled with a conviction far beyond his years. "And you don't deserve to be up there." Silence. A silence so thick it was suffocating. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. What had begun as a simple case had now unraveled into something far bigger. Malik had pulled back the curtain on a truth no one was ready for. And now, there was no turning back. The next moments would change everything. Malik's heart pounded in his chest as his accusation echoed through the courtroom, shattering the air like a thunderclap. For the first time, he saw a crack in Judge Thompson's normally unshakable demeanor. The judge, always composed and unreadable, suddenly seemed vulnerable. His face paled, his hands twitched ever so slightly. Malik took a step forward, his conviction firm, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "I know who you really are," he declared, his finger still pointing directly at the judge. "You've been hiding behind that robe, pretending to be someone you're not." The air grew thick with tension, the weight of Malik's words settling over the courtroom like a suffocating fog. All eyes were on Judge Thompson, waiting for his response. But for the first time, the man who had commanded authority with ease seemed lost. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out at first. Then at last his voice wavered. "What is this nonsense, boy?" The words came out rushed, unsteady. "Sit down." Normally, such an order would have been absolute, an unchallenged command that restored order. But now there was something else beneath it, something desperate. Malik refused to back down. He stood firm, his eyes never leaving the judge's. "No," he said, his voice rising, filled with a newfound power. "You can't silence me." The courtroom held its breath. "You're not even the real judge," Malik continued, his words slicing through the silence like a blade. "You took his place." Gasps rippled through the crowd, a collective shock that sent shivers through those in attendance. The defense attorneys shifted uneasily, their confidence shaken. Even the jury, who had followed the trial with careful neutrality, now exchanged uncertain glances. The foundation of everything they had believed, everything they had trusted, was suddenly crumbling. Malik stood unwavering, his small frame radiating a strength far beyond his years. His eyes burned with a fire that refused to be extinguished. "I know what you did," he pressed on, his voice steady, relentless. "You're not who you say you are." The entire courtroom had fallen into a stunned silence. For the first time, Judge Thompson's authority was not only questioned, it was unraveling before everyone's eyes. What had begun as a simple trial was now something far greater. Justice itself was being put on trial, and Malik had lit the match. The room erupted into chaos as the weight of Malik's revelation settled in. The judge's carefully built world, a fortress of deception, was beginning to crumble. Within moments, an official investigation was launched into Judge Thompson's true identity. The legal system, once thought to be an unshakable pillar of fairness, was being exposed as something far darker. As investigators dug into the judge's past, the truth they uncovered was more horrifying than anyone had imagined. Judge Thompson had been a suspect in a massive corruption scandal years ago. His name quietly erased from records, his crimes buried beneath layers of deceit. But Malik had unearthed it all. Further revelations painted an even more sinister picture. Thompson wasn't just a fraud. He was a puppet in a powerful criminal network, a man who had spent years manipulating justice to serve his own ends. Bribes, illegal dealings, trials rigged to protect the guilty. His corruption ran deep, infecting the very core of the system he had sworn to uphold. And Malik's family had been caught in the middle of it. The case that had first brought Malik to court was no longer just about seeking justice for his loved ones. It was about exposing a system built on lies. As the truth spread, shockwaves rippled through the city. The people who had once placed their trust in Judge Thompson were now forced to question everything. Malik's courage had not only unmasked a single corrupt man, it had uncovered an entire web of deception, forcing a reckoning that could no longer be ignored. The trial was halted immediately, the case thrown into disarray. But what had seemed like chaos was, in reality, the beginning of something greater. Justice was no longer an illusion. The fight was far from over. Investigators now turned their attention to every corner of the system, determined to uncover just how deep the corruption ran. The man who had once passed judgment upon others now found himself in handcuffs, his crimes laid bare for all to see. The world that had once protected him had finally turned against him. And at the heart of it all stood Malik, the boy who had refused to be silenced, the boy who had shattered an empire of lies with nothing but his truth. In the days that followed, his name spread far beyond the walls of that courtroom. He was no longer just a child seeking justice for his family. He had become a symbol of courage, a beacon of hope in a system that had long been broken. But Malik didn't seek fame. He hadn't done this for recognition. He had done it because it was right. And though the dust was still settling, one thing was certain. The world would never forget the day Malik spoke the truth. For far too long, the truth had been buried beneath the weight of corruption and silence. But in the final moments of this extraordinary journey, Malik stood tall, his heart pounding with the realization that he had altered the course of history. The world now knew the truth. The system that had once thrived on deception and injustice was forced to confront its failures. What lay ahead for Malik was uncertain, but one thing was undeniable. He had proven that even the faintest voice, when spoken with courage, could shake the foundations of power. Stay tuned for the final chapter of this incredible odyssey. The fight for justice may have reached its conclusion for now, but Malik's legacy would live on, a beacon for those who dared to stand against oppression. His bravery did not go unnoticed. The fearless act of a young boy in a courtroom did not just bring down a corrupt judge. It ignited a revolution of truth. Malik's actions became the catalyst for a long overdue reckoning, giving voice to those who had been silenced by a broken and unjust system. As the echoes of the trial faded, Malik felt the weight of his actions settle upon him. He had not merely won a case, he had unearthed a truth that could never again be hidden. His name now carried meaning far beyond himself. To some, he was a hero. To others, a symbol of defiance and hope. Yet despite the recognition, Malik's heart was heavy. The battle had been long and brutal, filled with sleepless nights and moments of despair. The scars it left behind, though invisible, were deep. Reflecting on everything that had transpired, he understood that his fight had never been just about this one case. It was about dismantling a system that had crushed far too many lives. He had taken a stand, and now the world was awakening to the injustices that had been allowed to fester for generations. His family, once shackled by the cruel grip of corruption, could finally breathe freely. The chains that had bound them for so long had been broken, and for the first time in years, justice felt like more than just an empty word. The aftermath of the trial was a whirlwind. Malik had never anticipated that his actions would carry such far-reaching consequences. But as the dust settled, a newfound sense of peace washed over him. His family, once burdened by fear and uncertainty, was now healing. The corrupt judge who had once determined their fate had been stripped of power, his lies exposed for all to see. The world had watched as a young boy had stood against a giant and won. For Malik, this was not an ending, but a beginning. The truth had been set free, and with it came a future no longer shackled by the past. His family had been given a second chance, one earned through struggle, pain, and unbreakable resilience. The road to justice had been paved with sacrifice, but in the end, it had brought them closer together. And though they had won this battle, Malik understood that the war against injustice would never truly be over. Standing at the precipice of a new chapter, Malik gazed at the world before him, knowing that his journey was far from finished. He had ignited a fire, one that would continue to burn long after his own fight was over. The young boy who had once felt powerless had become a symbol of defiance, a reminder that courage knows no age, that truth cannot be silenced, and that even the smallest voice can spark a revolution. In the final moments of this remarkable journey, Malik smiled, a quiet, knowing smile filled with both exhaustion and hope. The fight had taken its toll, but he was not done. He was ready for whatever lay ahead, because as long as injustice existed, as long as there were voices yet unheard, Malik knew his mission was not complete. Thank you for following Malik's journey. Though this chapter may be coming to a close, the story of courage, resilience, and the fight for what is right will continue. The world is uncertain, but with bravery and determination, anything is possible. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will inspire, challenge, and remind us all of the power of speaking up, even when the odds seem impossible.